So, just looking at my channel, you can probably tell I'm a fan of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. And one of the hardest things about being a JoJo fan? Meeting other JoJo fans. Now, of course, in any community, you're gonna have the crazy and the cringy. That's just how our modern internetscape works. It's to be expected, and you just gotta deal with it. The good, the bad, and the unshowered. But I'll tell you what I am sick of. These JoJo fans you meet who come up to you with these smug looks on their face explaining over and over why parts 4 and 7 are the best parts and they will hear no slander against them. Meanwhile, they can't seem to come up with a reason why they're friendless and alone standing in the corner. Probably has something to do with the BO from not showering.
I hate it. I don't understand anything. I'm like, why? Part 4 is amazing. He's like,
and I didn't think this new adventure could really hold my attention, but boy was I wrong, because part 4 is the best part in JoJo's.
Now, there's nothing wrong, of course, with having your own opinions, and you're free to like or hate whatever parts you want. But I need to get something straight with these people. Parts 4 and 7 are not the best parts of JoJo. Well, okay, part 7 might be the best. My feelings towards it are complicated, to say the least, but that's a topic for another video. But part 4 is not the greatest. Part 4 is, dare I say it, mid. Okay, I know I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for this, but I mean it. I will be silenced no more. Part 4 is mid. Okay, so if there's anyone who's left watching, I'll get into my personal reasons of why part 4 of JoJo, Diamond is Unbreakable, is mid. I think there's no better place to start with part 4 than how absolutely awful the pacing of this part is. And before we get into it, I gotta explain what I mean by pacing. Pacing refers to how quickly or slowly the events of a story unfold. It's like a song. The rhythm affects how you feel. Too slow and you're bored, too fast and you're confused. It's how the author manages the speed at which the information is presented and events unfold, influencing the reader's engagement and emotional experience. Good pacing keeps you hooked without you even noticing. Now, I'll admit, pacing is definitely not one of JoJo's strongest aspects, period. I would argue the only part with really good pacing all the way through it is Part 2, surprisingly. Everything flows very neatly together, and nothing feels like it's there for no reason, and the tension escalates pretty steadily throughout the whole thing up until the end. All the other parts are just okay with their pacing, or just straight up bad. The first few episodes are pretty good. We get introduced to an interesting new villain who immediately establishes himself as a threat by killing Josuke's grandfather, and then he immediately gets taken out. Great setup, zero payoff. Then we meet the Nijimura brothers, who have a really interesting backstory and motivation. Okay, here's where the plot finally starts. And then one of them gets killed, and the issue of the Nijimura father never gets satisfyingly dealt with. Then we meet a bunch of random villains, one after another, who keep getting defeated and coming back as friends. So basically the first half of Diamond is Unbreakable just has a bunch of disconnected plot threads that don't relate to an overarching narrative. This all just feels like filler, and not in a fun slice of life way. No, I'm talking zero stakes, lighthearted, what am I watching and why type of storytelling. You go from an escaped convict water stand killing Josuke's grandfather, to a really depressing story with the Nijimura family, then back to wackiness with Koichi getting kidnapped by a psycho girl, to a chef that slaps you with healing pasta, to an invisible baby, to that, and none of it connects back to the main plot. It's like Araki took a bunch of stand ideas he doodled in the margins of his sketchbook and just started rolling dice to see which ones would get chapters. Now, I get it. Part 4 is supposed to be smaller scale, lighthearted, character-driven stories, and the weird stuff is meant to be bizarre. Hey, that's the name of the story! But small scale doesn't have to mean slow and meandering. Take Part 1 for example. The first few episodes, it was just a pretty small conflict between characters, no world-ending stuff, but it still felt very tense and personal to see Jonathan and Dio at odds with one another. But for like 20 episodes of the Part 4 anime, and an even longer stretch of the manga, there's no real sense of direction. Things just kind of happen randomly. story. And it's not that the content is all bad. Some of the early stand users are fun, and I actually really enjoy the fight with Bug Eaten and the arc where Rohan kidnaps Koichi. They're really creative, but it all just feels so disconnected from the overall narrative, like it's happening in a vacuum. Now, I don't want to harp on this for too long, since this is one of the main criticisms that gets brought up against Part 4 a lot, so it's nothing new. But if you're watching Part 4 for the first time, it kind of makes you wonder what the main story is, or if there's even going to be one, since all these random villains with no connection to each other keep showing up and getting defeated pretty quickly. But just when you're about to give up and accept that Part 4 is a slice of life sitcom with stands, bam! Suddenly Kira shows up, and now there's a plot. This is where Part 4 starts cooking. Yoshikage Kira is one of the most praised villains in all of fiction, and for good reason. He's so good, he practically saves the story, almost to its detriment. More on that in a sec, though. Once Kira shows up, it's like a different series takes over. Suddenly there's tension, stakes, an actual goal. The story shifts from random slice of life to, oh no, there's a serial killer in this town and we need to find him before he murders anyone else. And it works. Kira is creepy, he's clever, he's weirdly likable, and his power is genuinely terrifying. Kinda makes you wonder why this wasn't happening sooner, but whatever. He's definitely my favorite villain in JoJo. See, I even have this framed picture of him on my desk. Isn't that neat? But there's a twist. Here's the problem with Kira. See, when Kira is first introduced, it's this burst of narrative clarity. Suddenly, the story has direction. The pace finally picks up. There's urgency. We finally understand what this season is about.
Thing's still in one piece.
Can we get much higher? But as soon as the show gives you a taste of that, it immediately hits the brakes. Why? Because Kira goes into hiding. He steals the identity of a random office worker named Kosaku Kawajiri and decides to play house with a woman and child who thinks he's their dad. And the story kind of just parks itself there. For like 8 episodes. I am not exaggerating. We spent nearly a third of the second half just watching Kira pretend to be a regular dude, which granted, is very creepy.
Here's Johnny!
And I get what Araki's going for. It's supposed to be creepy. It's supposed to be a slow burn. But after finally giving the story a main antagonist, a sense of purpose, and an actual threat, we completely lose the momentum again. It's like Part 4 finally figured out what it wants to be, and then immediately decided to not be that. And during this whole Kira as Kawajiri saga, the main cast basically just wanders around. There's kind of an investigation happening to find Kira, not really a coordinated effort to find him though. The only people we see actively looking for Kira are Jotaro and Rohan, and even their efforts to find him aren't that focused on. Like, a literal serial killer is on the loose, and they're just out there touching grass. The story instead shifts focus to Hayato, this random kid we've never met before, and Josuke doesn't even really seem like he cares that much. And everyone else? Nothing. Shigechi just dies and everyone's like, ah, man, that sucks. Well, anyway. Oh, look, an unrelated subplot. It completely kills the pacing again. But this time, not because nothing is happening. There are things happening. They just feel disconnected from the rest of the narrative. It's like Kira is in his own spin-off show while the heroes are waiting for a plot update. And the worst part is, this stretch has some of the best psychological tension in the entire part. Thursday, July 15th is one of my favorite arcs in JoJo with the way the simultaneous storytelling is done. The Hayato versus Kira stuff? Genuinely intense. The reveal of Bites the Dust? Brilliant. But you have to wade through so much narrative fog to get to it. And by the time we finally reunite the villain and the heroes, we're in the last 5 episodes. The story suddenly slams the gas again and rushes through an endgame that should have started way earlier. Basically, this part spends a lot of time doing nothing. And a bunch of really cool stuff happens, and then goes back to doing nothing for an arbitrary amount of time. Basically, this makes part 4 kind of hard to get through, and makes the tense moments feel more hollow since you're questioning why they weren't happening sooner. The show speeds up way fast, and suddenly we're in endgame territory. It's a total gear shift again. Speaking of shifts, that brings me to another major issue with part 4. Tone is all over the place. Tone is the overall voice of your story, basically the vibe it has going for it. Other JoJo parts hit their tones beautifully. Part 2 is fruity, adventurous chaos. Part 3 is a bit of a weird blend of road trip and high-stakes action thriller, but it works. Part 5 feels like an intense mafia drama with superpowers, but no matter what part you're in, it's all connected by everything being so bizarre. And And don't get me wrong, blending tones can work. Jojo is built on really weird stuff juxtaposing with the mundane. But part 4 kind of feels like it can't make up its mind. Here the shifts don't feel deliberate. They feel like the story is constantly flipping channels. You're never quite sure how you're supposed to feel. One episode, it's a lighthearted comedy about spaghetti that heals your back problems. Next, it's terrifying and insane. Next minute, it's sitcom hijinks about Josuke and Okuyasu trying to win the lottery with a kid's stand. And the next episode, it's tragic character death where said kid explodes on school grounds. Another good example of this show's inconsistent tone is the strange clash of the theme songs with the actual show. Alright, now I know I'm gonna get a lot of hate for saying this, but I don't care. I do not like Crazy Noisy Bizarre Town.
You what?
He's different! Let's get it!
Okay, now that my house is sufficiently scorched from that hot take, I'm ready to keep going. I'll give it this. This is definitely one of the best JoJo OPs just from the visuals alone. It's vibrant, colorful, dynamic, definitely hits the 90s vibe that this OP is going for, but it just feels kind of out of place? Maybe it's just me, but it feels really weird to go from the absolutely action-packed finale of part 3 straight into this weird disco party intro. And I get it, this part and OP are meant to be different, and it's going for a different tone, but even discounting the other parts of JoJo, Crazy Noisy Bizarre Town still doesn't feel like it fits into its own part. I was kind of lying earlier when I said that the first half of part 4 is lighthearted. There's some pretty dark stuff in it, and the wacky theme song just kind of really kills the tone of any scene that comes before or after it. We go from scenes of to and then there's Chase. Okay, I'm ready for some more hate. I really like this intro. But this theme song has the opposite problem from Crazy Noisy Bizarre Town. It's too dark. It's all brooding visuals, gritty guitar, and moody angst. Great for a more serious serial killer arc. Weird choice for episodes where the gang is collecting spare change with a greedy little goblin man and getting makeovers from a stand user esthetician. There's still the slice of life aspect in a lot of the episodes that this intro plays during, and it does not help the flip-flopping tone. So Crazy Noisy Bizarre Town is too upbeat, and Chase is too serious. But then, finally, we get Great Days. Now, this is the sweet spot. Upbeat and eerie. Fun and unsettling. It matches the mood of part 4 better than anything else. Even the visuals feel like a culmination of everything the season has been trying to be up to this point. This is the best intro in part 4, hands down. Get it? Hands. It blends with the lighthearted tone and the dark stuff really well. The villain interrupt version is kinda whatever though. Compared to Dio stopping the intro in part 3, this just kinda feels like Kira asked Dio if he could copy his homework. The Units version that plays at the end is a banger though. It helps tie the saga of JoJo up to that point in a neat little bow. Okay, and since I'm talking about all the OPs, I might as well talk about the ED I Want You by Savage Garden really quick. This song is boring and forgettable, has absolutely nothing to do with the overall vibe or plot of part 4, and pales in comparisons to EDs from other parts that fit their story super well, like Roundabout, Last Train Home, and Distant Dreamer, but is still better than the absolutely hilarious and tone-deaf voice of Freaking You from part 5. Whew. The tonal confusion doesn't stop with the music either. It bleeds into how characters and plot lines are handled throughout the entire part. Take Shigechi again. His death is horrifying, like genuinely disturbing in a way that JoJo rarely leans into. He dies trying to reach someone for help, body disintegrating, leaving nothing behind, and Raimi gets to watch his ghost fly off into the ether while being killed. It's pretty dark. And then the cast just kinda moves on. They mention it once or twice, but it doesn't seem to shake anyone that much, and they don't really mention him very much after he dies.
これでみんな動き出すってわけか。
And then they followed up with even more wacky stand user fights. It's like the story doesn't know how seriously to take itself, so you don't know how seriously you're supposed to take it. And let's not forget the Nijimura brothers. They're introduced with this emotionally loaded backstory. A father mutated by Dio's cells, trapped in a grotesque, limbo-like existence where he can't die. You think it's setting up some deeper emotional payoff or eventual resolution? Nope. We just forget about him. He's still up there, on the floor, probably making YTPs like in that one Jack the Ripper edit. Chekhov's gun? What's that, am I right? This is the issue. The show wants to dip into dark emotional storytelling, and that's fine, but then it immediately undercuts itself with wacky one-offs or just drops plot threads altogether. And that lack of tonal commitment makes the emotional highs feel unearned and the comedy feel out of place. There's nothing wrong with comedy or darkness. JoJo thrives on both, but you have to anchor your story in something. You can go bizarre or dramatic, dramatic, or go full slice of life. But if you try to do all three without a consistent tone holding them together, you're just gonna get whiplash. And sadly, that tonal confusion doesn't always know when to let a moment land. Part 4 can be terrifying, it can be hilarious, it can be heartfelt, but because it can't decide what it wants to be, it ends up diluting all three.
His eyes. That stare. Polnareff is hiding. Get out! I fell for hours!
言っておくが、ジョースターさん
Welcome to the amazing digital circus!
俺は何回知るんだ。次はどこから？
All right, let me be real here.
What are we doing right now?
We're intermissioning!
Why?
And now back to the show!
Dang, I've been pretty negative in this video so far, so let's take a step back and talk about something that I love. Yippee! While using it as an excuse to once again lean into something I don't like. Yoshikage Kira. And how the quality of this part is way too dependent on his presence in the story, and the conflict with him is way too dragged out. I'm not sure how to make that into a title card. Alright, we already know Yoshikage Kira is one of the greatest villains in not just Jojo, but in fiction. I'm not doing a deep dive analysis of him, that's not what this video is for, and there's tons of other videos on YouTube doing that exact same thing. I'd just be repeating what everyone else is saying. What I will talk about is how the quality of the story is way too correlated to Kira's presence in the story. When Kira is on screen, Part 4 slaps. There's tension, there's urgency, and you kind of root for him at certain points. There's actual narrative momentum. You feel like stuff matters, but the second he disappears, usually just to go live his best suburban house husband life, the story just kind of sits there and starts idling like a busted motorcycle. Let's be honest, Kira's introduction kicks off what should have been the main plot from the beginning. A serial killer hiding in plain sight in a peaceful town is an amazing premise, but instead of sticking with it and building toward a climactic cat and mouse chase akin to Death Note, the show hits the brakes again and goes, wait, what if we did some more Stan User of the Week episodes first? What? We park the plot and sit through like 8 episodes of this guy pretending to be a normal office worker while the main gang goes after unrelated Stan users. Now, like I said before, this stretch is creepy and interesting. In isolation. The Hayato subplot has real psychological tension, but in the bigger picture, it just completely stalls the story while we wait for everyone else to get off their butts and go find him. And Kira's dad flying around creating Stan users with the arrow is basically just what was happening in the first half of the story with Keicho, so it just feels like a big step backwards. And yes, it does build tension, but that tension drags forever. We've already had a slow first half, and now we're crawling again, right when we were finally gaining some steam. By the time the action actually ramps up again, we're at basically the end of the part. It all just feels rushed. Because it is rushed. The final confrontation is pretty cool, but it doesn't feel earned. It feels like a climax that came too late after too much waiting. And that's what I mean when I say the story is too dependent on Kira. When he's there, the part is exciting. When he's gone, it's like nobody knows what to do, and you just want Kira to come back so the story can be interesting again. And that's a problem, because no matter how great your villain is, your story shouldn't completely flatline when he's off screen. That is not good writing.
I think this is all I have. I'm nothing without Kira.
If you're nothing without Kira, then you shouldn't have it.
In fact, part 4 is what you get when you combine a reactive protagonist with a reactive villain. What do I mean by that? Well, it's simple. Let's talk about character writing. In most stories, you can classify characters into 2 different categories: reactive and proactive. After the inciting incident of the story, if characters start making choices that actively affect the narrative, then they are proactive. If they make more passive choices that allow the narrative to affect them, then they are reactive. Let's break it down by comparing 2 characters from 2 very different movies: Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games and Reggie from Freebirds. I swear this is a relevant comparison. Katniss is a proactive protagonist. Following the death of her father, she takes charge of her family's situation and learns to hunt, single-handedly saving her mother and sister. When Prim's name is called, she volunteers before Prim even goes on stage. She engineers her own survival strategy. She does spend most of the games running away, but that's because she's actively choosing to play defense, knowing it's the safer strategy. When she teams up with Rue, they immediately make a plan to destroy the career's supply of food. And when the rules are changed, she makes the choice to actively seek out Peeta rather than just hoping she runs into him. She defies the Capitol with her Eat the Berry stunt, and in doing so becomes a political symbol. At almost every major turning point in the story, Katniss is the one making things happen. She forces the plot to bend around her. Now let's look at Reggie. Reggie is not that. He's entirely reactive. He spends the entire movie getting dragged around, kicking and screaming by Jake. His actions don't affect the narrative or the outcome of the story for most of the movie. The story is about how he's acted upon, not how he acts. Basically, proactive characters don't wait for things to happen. They make things happen. Their actions drive the story forward, and without them, things in the story would be vastly different. Now, this isn't to say that reactive protagonists are always bad. Bilbo Baggins is an extremely reactive character, but he's still one of my favorite characters in his own series, but your story will usually have a harder time being engaging when your protagonist isn't driving the events of the plot. Bilbo works as a stand-in for the audience, and we see Middle-earth through his eyes. Every story is in need of something different, so in some cases, a more reactive protagonist makes more sense. Even Katniss herself becomes a bit more reactive as her series progresses, since her agency gets restricted from being watched by the Capitol or District 13's government. Part 4 of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a rare case where both the hero and villain are reactive characters, and that's a huge reason why the plot feels so aimless. Kira and Josuke are both trying to be the Reggie of Part 4. Focusing on Josuke, things for the most part just happen around him, and narratively, he's just kind of there. He doesn't chase leads, he doesn't make big bold choices that shift the direction of the story, he reacts to whatever villain of the week pops up and then goes back to chilling until the next one. If Part 4 fully committed to the wacky slice of life angle, then this could have worked. But remember, this story is also trying to be a murder mystery thriller, and that's frustrating because he could have been a Katniss-style protagonist. He had the right setup. The murder of his grandfather could have sparked a character arc of vengeance, justice, or growth, but instead, it's never brought up again. Like, well, he's dead.
I'm only here to dispense justice. That's cringe.
Josuke!
And your setup is weak.
Josuke takes a backseat. Meanwhile, Jotaro, Rohan, and even Hayato end up doing more detective work and taking more initiative in the back half of the story than Josuke ever does. And when your side characters feel more proactive than your protagonist, the narrative energy starts to shift away from the person we're supposed to care about most. That's not to say that Josuke is a bad character. He's funny, he's charming, he's got a cool stand, his fights are fun. He's definitely up there as one of my favorite JoJos. But when you start looking at it from a broader perspective, Part 4's plot happens around him instead of because of him. And then there's Kira, who is also weirdly reactive. Sure, he's terrifying and interesting when he's present, but he doesn't have some master plan or an active goal. He just wants to be left alone. And when people find out who he is, he reacts by running or improvising a new identity. He very rarely will stand his ground and fight. For most of the story, he's not hunting down the heroes or escalating the stakes. He just tries to stay under the radar and hope no one notices him blowing people up. And yeah, I know, his whole thing is living a peaceful life and evading conflict, but it just doesn't feel satisfying from a narrative perspective. And when your main character and villain aren't pushing the story forward, it leaves the narrative in this weird limbo. It makes the pacing feel weird. And that's why the tension spikes only when Kira shows up or has a confrontation with other characters. So yeah, both the hero and villain are reactive. Neither one is pushing the plot forward. And that's why Part 4 spends so much time spinning its wheels. But you want to know who could have added weight, agency, and momentum to the story? Yep, we need to talk about Joseph Joestar. I will give Part 4 this. One of its greatest strengths is how the characters are written. For the most part, they're all pretty likable, and I enjoy watching them interact with each other. But if I had to pick this part's greatest flaw, it would be the pacing, but its treatment of Joseph Joestar is a close second. Let me preface this by saying, I absolutely love Joseph Joestar. He is easily the best JoJo. I also don't mind his role in Stardust Crusaders like a lot of other people do. Yeah, sure, he's older, goofier, and not quite the trickster we saw in Part 2, but he still gets some good moments. He's funny, and most importantly, he feels like Joseph. So when I heard that he was gonna be in Part 4, I was excited. I mean, come on, one of my favorite characters back for one last hurrah, and then they just do nothing with him. Joseph shows up, has his episode with Josuke and the Invisible Baby, and then that's it. He does nothing for the rest of the part. And okay, I get it. He's old now. But it's not just that he's old. He has no real function in the story. He contributes nothing to the investigation of Kira. He doesn't do anything. He doesn't reveal anything useful. He's just there. He's in the background of a few shots, and he accidentally adopts an invisible baby. That's it. See, the whole reason they bring him in is so they can use his stand Hermit Purple to locate Red Hot Chili Pepper's user. But then Chili Pepper's user reveals himself right before Joseph comes and Josuke beats him. So they don't even need Joseph. So he just sits around the whole part doing nothing. If the arc Joseph was in was fun or interesting, I could excuse it. But the Invisible Baby arc is definitely one of the worst of early part 4, at least in my opinion. Boring, meandering, and never ends up coming back in a significant way, just like a lot of other plot threads from part 4. So it just ends up being pointless filler. Joseph clearly did not need to be in this part, so why is he here? What does he contribute to the plot? Like, really, think about it.
Man, sure is hard to find this serial killer. If only there was someone we knew with the power to locate our enemies by using some kind of stand. Oh well. Objection!
Well, actually, they couldn't use Hermit Purple to track Kira because it's not that accurate and takes pictures of the wrong thing, like how it took a picture of Angelo instead of Josuke at the beginning.
Okay, you hormone beat wannabes, if that's really the case, then the show should have done a better job of explaining that to us, rather than just leaving it completely unresolved and leaving the audience to fill in the gaps. But here's the thing that really bugs me. It's not just that Joseph doesn't do anything, because if that's all it was, I wouldn't be talking about this now. It's that part 4 had the perfect opportunity to give us something meaningful, something that could have added real emotional depth to the story. Because Joseph isn't just some random dude. He's Joseph freaking Joestar, aka one of the funniest and most beloved characters in the entire series. This could have been a really awesome chance to have him interact with the main cast and contribute to the story, similar to what he did in part 3. And instead, we get a side quest about the invisible baby. You'd think one of the most important characters in the series showing up would be a bigger deal. You'd think this would be a perfect opportunity to have him interact with Josuke, his illegitimate son, in a meaningful way, and the rest of the cast, or at the very least, add some of that signature Joseph charm to the group dynamic, maybe highlight some generational themes, show how much Joseph has or hasn't changed, let him play off some of the new characters in ways that deepen both his arc and theirs, and instead, we just get the invisible baby quest. And that's it. Joseph gets relegated to a background character and mostly disappears from the main story, which just feels like such a waste. I honestly would rather he wasn't in this part at all, because then his presence wouldn't just feel like a gag. And one of my favorite characters gets reduced to nothing. It's a huge missed opportunity, and one of the biggest wastes of potential in the entire series. So with that, Joseph is now just a really creepy old dude who had an affair with a woman 40 years younger than him, and left her to raise their child on her own. Gross. You want to know what makes for great drama in any piece of fiction? Death. Having your characters die is a great way to pump up the action in the story. Show that there's consequences for when things go wrong. Help make the audience invested so that they get upset when their favorite characters die. And Jojo's Bizarre Adventure is no stranger to death. I mean, in all the previous parts, half of the main cast got killed pretty brutally. So what's part 4 got for us? Shigechi. And Dr. Aya. Okay, and Kira, but that's a given, he's the villain. And that's it. That's all the death that part 4 strikes against the main cast. And while Shigechi's death is a good one, don't get me wrong, it's also pretty much the only one that sticks. We're told that there's this terrifying serial killer lurking in town, someone with a body count stretching back over a decade, and yet somehow all the main cast makes it out just fine with no casualties. And look, I'm not saying I wanted anyone to die, but I don't know, it just feels weird that in an action series like Jojo, for everyone in the main cast to make it out just fine, when in all the previous and future parts of the series, they tend to take a major hit in the main cast. And the worst part is that this part teases you with death over and over. When Koichi confronts Kira and then gets killed, and then Josuke revives him, and when Jotaro is left unconscious on the ground, and then Josuke heals him, and then Hayato gets killed by Kira, and then it gets undone by Bites the Dust. Okay, no wait, there was that time that Rohan dies. Oh no wait, that was also undone by Bites the Dust. Okay, Okuyasu gets killed. Oh no, he just decided he didn't want to be dead and he's back. And look, part 4 isn't the only part of Jojo that struggles with fake out deaths, but there are so many opportunities this story could have taken to kill off major characters to impact the story, but they get undone right after and it just feels really cheap. Ryohei and Okuyasu have got to be the worst cases. Ryohei's death happens so early and nothing comes of it, so whenever I rewatch part 4, I kind of completely forget that he even exists. Okuyasu, Oh, come on. He was right there. He should have been killed by Kira. I don't care what anyone else says. This could have shown how there was a price to defeating Kira. But no, Okuyasu just gets to walk away like nothing happened. It's just not very narratively satisfying. It makes the story feel just too safe. And when your story is supposed to be about a dangerous, stand-using serial killer blending into your neighborhood, safe isn't really a vibe you want. Finales can make or break your JoJo part. Jojolion was a fantastic part of JoJo, until the second half of the Wonder Review arc. Part 3 can be overly long and hard to get through, but the finale with Dio and the Crusaders saying goodbye was so good and emotionally powerful, it kinda makes the rest of the part worth it. Part 4's finale is fine. I've already gone over my issues with the pacing of this finale and how it affects the rest of the story, but let's talk about the actual finale itself. This is what everything in this part has been culminating to. The lead up to the fight is pretty good. I like the conflict of Hayato working to break the Bites the Dust loop and how he tricks Kira into revealing his identity right as Josuke shows up. That was cool, but the fight itself? Okuyasu gets taken out immediately. That's pretty cool. Very dramatic and emotional until he comes back in a total Deus Ex Machina, completely ruining the emotional punch this moment, but I already talked about that. And then the whole fight is just so much talking! Josuke attacks. Kira monologues. Launches an air bullet. Josuke finds a way to deflect or block it. Hayato panics. Kira monologues some more. Launches another air bullet. Josuke finds a way to deflect or block it. Kira monologues some more. Hayato panics. Kira launches another air bullet. Josuke finds a way to block or deflect it. Kira monologue. And then there's this weird lull where Josuke and Hayato hide out in this random house, and then they get chased around by even more air bullets. Yay! The energy just starts and stops way too much. And I get it, this is supposed to be a more psychological fight, less brute force, more mind games, but the pacing is so stop-start and it doesn't have the same escalating intensity that other JoJo finales pull off. The choreography of the final confrontation is pretty cool though. I mean, compare this to part 3. That final showdown with Dio had momentum. Every beat built on the last. There were actual stakes every time someone got hit. The Crusaders were dropping left and right, and by the time Jotaro lands that final punch, it feels earned. They've suffered losses. They've fought tooth and nail, and catharsis like that hits like a freight train. But part 4, Josuke and Kira monologue at each other a bit, have a bunch of air bullet shenanigans, Okuyasu has his Deus Ex Machina moment, and then surprise! Ambulance Ex Machina! Kira's feat is just so weirdly underwhelming. Now, I will say, it's very fitting to have Kira die by accident after he spent the whole part bragging about how lucky he is, and I think this is just as hilarious as the next JoJo fan, and this moment has definitely spawned some of the best memes in existence. But I don't know, it just doesn't feel that satisfying to me. It's not because he didn't deserve to lose. He absolutely did, but because the story takes the win away from the main characters. It feels like he could have met this end even if they weren't there. After a whole season of build-up, psychological tension, narrative delays, that's the payoff. And sure, Reimi's final moment with Kira is satisfying. It's one of the more emotionally grounded scenes in the part, but it comes after all the action. So like I said, it still just feels like this is a win being taken away from the main characters and more like a bonus scene. The whole thing ends with not a bang, but a weird meandering fizzle. And I get it, part 4 isn't trying to be bombastic, it's going for a smaller, more intimate vibe, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel that satisfying. Reimi's farewell is nice, and I like the ending montage of the characters just living their lives in Morio. So yeah, the finale is fine, it's not offensively bad, it has good moments, but compared to some of the other parts, it's just alright. At least we got some great memes out of it, but hey, at least it's nowhere near as atrocious as the finale in part 5. Alright, I've spent the last however many minutes dragging this part through the mud, so let's pump the brakes and talk about what actually works in Diamond is Unbreakable. Because despite everything I've said, I don't hate part 4. In fact, there are parts of it that I really enjoy. Let's start with the music. Part 4 has a pretty boppin' soundtrack, and I don't mean just the OPs and EDs. We already talked about those. I mean the score, the background tracks. Kira's theme is absolutely iconic. That haunting melody with the flute, oh, it's so perfect. It's like you can feel Kira sneaking up behind you, and that explosive climax of the song perfectly reflects his stand. Josuke's theme is also fantastic. It's not as iconic as the other main JoJo themes, but it's definitely up there. It just makes me want to bang my head to the melody. It's so good. And the rest of the music in this part is genuinely phenomenal. It sets the tone, even if the story doesn't always, builds tension, and makes scenes feel cooler than they are on paper. If nothing else, part 4 sounds like it knows what it's doing. Next up, Kira. I know I already talked about him earlier, but it bears repeating. Kira is one of Araki's best written villains. He's creepy, weirdly compelling, and has a stand that's both terrifying and creative. The fact that he wants to live a quiet life while murdering people and stealing their hands, that's just unsettling in the best way possible. Any scene with him in it is easily the highlight. And then there are the fights. I know I said part 4 might not have the most epic battles, but what it lacks in scale it makes up for in creativity and clarity. I think part 4 hits that perfect sweet spot of the abilities being creative but not too confusing like they can be in later parts. Fights like the Lock, Highway Star, Enigma, or Cheap Trick, they're clever, weird, and force the characters to solve problems instead of just punching through them. It strikes that sweet spot between not knowing what's going on and knowing what's going on perfectly and being invested, and helps hit that bizarre vibe perfectly. And that's something a lot of the later parts struggle with, having battles be so complex you can barely tell what's happening. This part is definitely also one of the funniest. Like, say what you want about the tone in Whiplash, but the comedy in part 4 does usually land. Josuke and Okuyasu are a hilarious duo in most of their scenes. Rohan usually always makes me laugh, intentionally and unintentionally. I don't care for the Italian food arc like a lot of people do, but I do think the twist of him just being a normal guy at the end was a funny and neat subversion. Too bad the rest of the episode sucks! But hey, that part was cool. There's a charm to part 4's comedy that keeps it fun, even when the story is questionable. You can tell Rocky was definitely having fun with these characters, and honestly, that counts for a lot. And you know what else I respect? Part 4 did not try to one-up Part 3. One of my least favorite things in any long-running series is when the world gets saved, only to be put in danger again in the next installment. It makes what the characters did in the previous story feel kind of pointless. It would have been so easy for Rocky to just be like, okay, let's go even bigger, but instead he dialed it back, which at this point in the series was exactly what it needed. Kira isn't trying to conquer the world or destroy the Joestars. He just wants to live quietly and murder people in peace. Sounds like a conflict of interest to me, but hey, you do you, man. But as messed up as that is, it's also refreshing. The stakes are smaller, more personal, and in some cases, that can be scarier than a massive world-ending threat. Minus the stands and bizarre stuff, things like this do happen in real life. Kira could be anyone. He could be your neighbor, your coworker, some guy that you see on the train. There's something really compelling about a villain whose power is hiding rather than dominating. It proves that you don't need to constantly escalate to keep a story interesting. Sometimes it's more tense when the world isn't at stake. That choice grounds Part 4 in a way that makes it stand apart from the rest of JoJo. And while I do have a lot of gripes with how it's executed, I still respect the attempt. Do wish though that this part continued the story of Part 3 in a meaningful way, similar to how the previous parts had plot threads that led into one another. So yeah, Part 4 is frustrating, flawed, inconsistent, and still a part I somewhat like. It's far from perfect, really far, but it's not without heart. And in a series like JoJo, where style and personality often matter just as much as plot and pacing, that heart goes a long way. But still, I couldn't help but wonder, what if Part 4 was different?
That's right. We're going back in time to get Part 4 off the menu.
Okay, for real though. Part of the reason this video took so long is because somewhere during writing the script, I started thinking, what if I rewrote this? What if I were in charge of the story for Part 4? What would it be? So then, I did. A lot. And it eventually ballooned into an entire outline for how I would change the plot of Part 4, and I realized that there was no way it was going to fit into this one, so that needs to be its own video. So next time, I will be releasing an announcement about the rewrite for Part 4, and don't worry, there won't be as big of a gap between this video and the next one, and I will see you all next time. Part 4's plot. Now let me do that again.